Chapter 201 Martial Idiot. When the barefoot man heard this, his heart filled with vigorous rage. This woman already had difficulty protecting her own life, yet she still continued to repeatedly raise her baseline. Good. 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 Thus, he laughed, annoyed, and said 3 goods, then today you can die here. Having said this, he pointed the huge silver sword out, and the huge sword immediately shot out brilliantly, releasing an extremely dazzling sword tip. Next, a relentless pressure shot out ruthlessly towards the young woman's forehead. When the young woman saw this, she gritted her teeth and hurriedly commanded the silk handkerchief to become a yellow plate roughly the size of a wheel to directly block it. With a rip, this top-grade magic tool that had been completely spent had actually been cut into pieces by the full-force huge silver sword, floating everywhere in the air. The silver sword brilliantly flashed, and under the control of the big man, it unhesitatingly continued to stab at the bitterly smiling young woman. With a clear dong sound, when the silver sword was 10 meters away from the young woman's forehead, it was blocked by a golden flying dagger that came shooting over from the side. Then, it danced in the air as a ball of golden light above the young woman. It would not allow the silver sword to drop even an inch. Who is it? Get out here. The barefoot man's face fell, and he made a gesture, retrieving the silver sword. Then, his eyes swept like lightning towards the side and tenaciously stared at a huge mountain rock, unwilling to let it go. This was because he had seen very clearly that the gold blade had flown out from there. The weather today is pretty good. Why would everybody fight and kill each other? It would be much better if we all sat down and had a nice, pleasant conversation. A figure flashed out from behind the rock, and an average-appearing yellow-robed youth spun out. This person rubbed his head, then raised his head to look at the sky and spoke this with a laugh. However, this youth's face was filled with helplessness. It was precisely the Han Li who, seeing that the young woman's life was in danger, had no choice but to make a move and save the green-clothed young woman. Han Li could only look at the sky and be speechless. He had actually made a move without thinking more about it upon seeing the young woman's gloomy countenance. This was truly breaking one of his rules to always play it safe. He had gotten himself into a troublesome situation for no reason. Truly, beautiful women brought disaster. However, Han Li also knew that this mostly was because the impression that woman had left on him was truly too deep. He was also unable to watch this person of whom he had a very favorable impression die right in front of his eyes and act indifferent. It seemed like his heart could not actually be considered hard. He really wasn't a vicious, merciless, and ambitious character who wouldn't recognize his own family. Han Li bitterly laughed and let his imagination run wild for a while. However, he had already stirred up the trouble and could only strengthen his spirit and cope with it for a moment. Luckily, after experiencing the battles with the woman with many treasures and Feng Yue, Han Li had a bit more confidence in contending against these elite disciples. Thus, he was not panicking in his heart and had grabbed a few things in his hand much earlier. It's you. The green-clothed young woman had now finally seen Han Li's face clearly and couldn't help but cover up her almond-shaped lips and cry out in surprise. She revealed an expression of disbelief. Seeing that the young woman had only just recognized who her savior was and appeared to be quite dazed, Han Li couldn't help but be in a good mood and think it was funny. However, on the surface he still only gently nodded at the young woman, then turned around and continued to say to the barefooted man, "How does this brother look upon my suggestion? It would be better if your esteemed self would let this woman go, and then you can go on your closed sun path while we can go our lonely wood bridge. Everyone can mind their own business, and thus wouldn't the peace not be disturbed." Han Li was still holding on to the thought that if he could avoid striking, he would avoid striking, and so he spoke the aforementioned words. In addition, starting a fiery battle with an expert for no reason could, perhaps, also force him to take measure to preserve his own life. It truly would not be a sensible decision. But Han Li had never expected that the barefooted man in front of him would actually turn a blind eye to his words, instead staring with great interest at the gold beetle swarm mother blade. It was as if to him, this golden blade interested him much more than Han Li himself. This kind of action from the opponent caused Han Li to become somewhat quietly resentful. He strongly endured the annoyance in his heart and was thinking of saying something when suddenly the man opened his mouth. This opening of his mouth caused Han Li to stare blankly. The golden blade in your hand should be part of the same set as the one floating in the air, right? Since it can block my silver sword's attack without being damaged for a while, it should be a top-grade magic tool. Did I guess correctly? The giant sword-sex barefooted male casually opened his mouth and asked with a bright shine in his eyes. His vigor suddenly rose in an extremely shocking manner. Han Li blinked a few times and was somewhat confused. He didn't know what the opponent's intentions were. However, he still thoughtlessly spoke and replied, "You are correct, they really are a top-grade magic tool. Furthermore, enough. Knowing this is enough. You can attack. If you can beat me, I will not only spare this woman's life, but even the spiritual medicines inside of the stone room will all belong to you too." This person didn't even wait for Han Li to finish talking before immediately interrupting what he was going to say. His face was filled with fanaticism, and he spoke the words that caused Han Li to be dumbstruck. This person was actually a martial idiot, one in the world of cultivators. At this time, Han Li suddenly realized this point, and he suddenly felt full of gloom, unable to speak even a sentence. On guard. The big man did not wait for Han Li to reply and actually did not even release a barrier, instead immediately controlling the silver sword and turning from the young woman's direction towards Han Li, aggressively pouncing over. After knowing how things stood with the opponent, Han Li understood that saying anything else would be wasting his time. Thus, he immediately shook the mother blade in his hand, and the other 7 blades flew out from his storage pouch. They became 7 streaks of golden tips that flew forward to meet the opponent's huge, silver sword without any sign of weakness. However, Han Li did not actually pull out a defensive talisman to increase his own protective barrier. This was because, after seeing the silver sword break through the young woman's silk handkerchief, Han Li was very clear in his heart that this silver sword's strength was truly too shocking. Under one stab from it, regular barriers would break instantly and the person would be killed, not even able to withstand one attack. Thus, it would be better to not add on defensive techniques. In this way he could rely on his movement technique's unpredictability to deal with the opponent's strange attacks. As Han Li was contemplating this, apart from the gold blade guarding near the young woman, the other 7 blades had already become entangled with the huge silver sword. It was as if 7 golden snakes and a huge python were incessantly rolling around and tearing into one another. Both did not show any weaknesses. One martial idiot means someone who only lives to fight.